So as you see, I'm doing deforestation's effect on biodiversity. So I want to start out by giving you guys a little bit of background understanding. Deforestation is the removal of a forest or stands of trees from land which is then converted to a non-forest use. Biodiversity, the other point of my topic, is the measure of variety and variability of life at the genetic, species, and ecosystem levels. Biological diversity is the resource upon which families, communities, nations, and future generations really depend. Without these resources, the ecosystem services that they provide would be nothing. To put this into perspective, the World Conservation Union estimated the monetary value of these goods and services provided by the ecosystem, and it came up to the sum of about $33 trillion annually, and that being US dollars. So it's the ecosystem services are just so influential, and there's really no way around it. We really need to take care of it. So I'm going to move on to the problem. The problem here is that deforestation is weakening the world's biodiversity at an alarming rate. The majority of the planet's valuable biodiversity lies within its forests. These diverse forests are so valuable due to the ecosystem services which they provide. They purify air and water, they detoxify and break down waste, they stabilize the climate, they moderate extreme weather, and they provide us with food, nutrients, and materials. A reduced or even a partially reduced biodiversity due to deforestation could mean that millions of people would face a food and water shortage, as well as being more susceptible to pests and disease. Not only would humans be hurt, but so would animals as well. Deforestation can lead to a direct loss of wildlife habitat, as well as general degradation of their habitat. The removal of trees and other types of vegetation reduces available food, shelter, and breeding habitat. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next slide. Don't be fooled. Contrary to popular belief, replanted forests are not always going to resemble the original forest. Sadly, a practice that is all too prevalent is a promise made by industries to replant deforested lands after they are harvested. Yes, most of the time these companies do replant the log areas. However, the truth is that these forests that are planted are replaced with commercially important trees that lack the original biodiversity and do not serve as habitats for native plants and animals. So basically they're replacing these trees just with the intent to harvest them again and not really taking care of the environment. Although the deserted forests may regrow after being cleared, this is not always the case. They don't always regrow, especially when remaining forests are highly fragmented. Fragmentation like this isolates populations of plant and animal species from each other. This makes it difficult to reproduce without genetic bottlenecks, and in some cases, the fragments may be too small to support large or territorial animals. Now I'm going to go ahead and give a time frame of how long deforestation lasted. Deforestation has really been around since the beginning of man. It existed for thousands of years since the original development of Homo sapiens. However, deforestation has only become a documented problem in the last few centuries. Spikes in deforestation are related to economic, technological, and cultural changes occurring in human populations. Some examples of these spikes include the steady growth of population in European forests from 9,000 to 5,000 BC, which led to extensive land clearing for agriculture, animal domestication. Another spike is marked by America's western expansion in the 1800s, which resulted in the clearing of about 177,000 square miles by 1850 and nearly 300,000 square miles by 1910. So that's how deforestation's really affected our country. But in the most recent years, the most prevalent and obvious example of deforestation is the Amazon rainforest, which has been in the spotlight since about the mid-1950s. So not only is the Amazon obviously a hotspot for deforestation, but there are also a number of about 10 other regions that the World Wildlife Foundation identified as where loss is expected to occur by 2030. These are the Amazon, the Atlantic Forest and Grand Chaco, Borneo, Cerrado, Choco-Darian, Congo Basin, Eastern Africa, Eastern Australia, the Greater Mekong, New Guinea, and Sumatra. So I'm going to give you guys a little bit of understanding of what each of these regions is facing. The Amazon is the world's largest forest. It's also the site of the biggest projected losses by 2030. This is mostly due to cattle ranching and agriculture, as they are the dominant causes of deforestation in that region. Moving on to the Atlantic Forest and Grand Chaco. The Atlantic Forest spans parts of Paraguay, Brazil, and Argentina in South America. It is one of the largest rainforests in the world, which surprisingly has a richer biodiversity per acre than the Amazon. However, the region is also where 75% of the Brazilian population lives. This is a situation that places a lot of pressure on forests from urban sprawl. Deforestation in the neighboring Gran Chaco, which is the largest dry forest in South America, is mainly due to the conversion of forest land to cropland and pasture. So you're looking at more of agriculture for the Gran Chaco. Borneo. Projections for 2030 for the heart of Borneo, which is the largest forest in the country, show only 33% of the lowland rainforest remaining. Deforestation and degradation are driven by weak governance and a lack of stability that encourages people to take what they can while they can, which will end up just being another example of tragedy of the commons. Cerrado, is a high plateau region in Brazil, which is just as threatened as the Amazon. It's mainly threatened from cattle ranching and the conversion of forests to soy plantations. If the current rate of loss continues, Cerrado's savanna, woodland, and forests outside of the protected areas will disappear definitely by 2030. Moving down the list to Choco-Darian, the forests in this region face pressures from roads, power lines, mining, and oil exploration. Most of the deforestation has been in the Ecuadorian Choco, but the Panama and Colombian portions of the regions are also increasingly under threat. The Congo Basin region contains 20% of the world's tropical forests. They have the highest biological diversity in Africa. The human population here in the Congo Basin is expected to double by 2020, between 2000 and 2030. It is mainly in urban areas, which make the forests close to large cities very threatened. The Eastern Africa region, the forests are overharvested or illegally logged or converted for livestock and cash crops. The coastal forests of Tanzania and Kenya have already been reduced to 10% of their original area, which is so sad and discouraging. Eastern Australia, despite a recent reduction in the forest loss, is a projected weakening of key legislation in frontline states of Queensland and New South Wales. They threaten a resurgence in deforestation, mainly to create pasture and livestock. Key species affected include koalas, possums, gliders, and tree-dependent birds. Then that brings me to the Greater Mekong. In the Greater Mekong, the economy is actually really booming for it being a developing country or developing region. This brings an urgent need to balance conservation with economic development, particularly with the desire to convert forest land for sugar, rice, rubber, and biofuels. As more land is converted, the threat to species grows. This is a region rich in species. In 2011 alone, 126 new species were discovered here, including fish, snakes, frogs, and bats. In New Guinea, and its neighboring islands, they are home to the largest remaining tracts of tropical forests in the Asia-Pacific region. In more than 6% of the world's species, and they're home to more than 6% of the world's species. But they face a growing deforestation threat from agriculture. Lastly, that brings me to the Sumatra region. Sumatra has become the center of Indonesia's palm oil production, which we talked about in class, which is the main industry driving deforestation, even in the protected forests and national parks. The status of plans by some governments to stabilize and reverse the forest loss remains unclear, leaving tigers, orangutans, rhinos, and other wildlife at high risk. That finishes up where deforestation is mostly a problem in today's world. So now I'm going to talk about the severity of the problem. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization estimates that the annual rate of deforestation is about 1.3 million square kilometers per decade. The largest amount of deforestation is occurring in the tropics, where a wide variety of forests exist. As of 2015, it is estimated that humans have cut down 46% of all trees globally. Today, experts estimate that we are losing species at a rate of between 1,000 and 10,000 times higher than the natural extinction rate as a result of deforestation. If you're not familiar, natural extinction rate is also known as the background extinction rate, which is the rate that species extinctions, it's the rate that species extinctions would occur if humans weren't around. So natural without humans and our interference. With that said, it is they believe that we are in the sixth extinction crisis after the 5 known extinction waves in geological history. So now that we know the severity of the problem, let's look at what's being done. In 2007, the UN Climate Change Conference saw the passing of the Bali Roadmap. It's a guide to emissions reduction, including ways to reduce deforestation. Over 180 countries agreed to uphold this roadmap. However, the US and China initially did not, but later they did concede and took up the roadmap. The roadmap called for developed countries to financially sponsor developing and undeveloped countries to reduce emissions from deforestation and the most sustainable paths of development. Norway is a great example of this. Norway became the first country in the world to ban deforestation across the board. They've made a commitment to zero deforestation, which means that Norwegian lawmakers will not award any government contracts to companies that take part in clear-cutting of trees. Norway also committed $1 billion to Brazil to sponsor their effort to cut back on deforestation. This led Brazil to reducing their annual deforestation area by 67% in the span of only 5 years, which is amazing that they were able to drop it that low in that amount of time. Other ways that other things being done are nonprofit NGOs like the Sustainable Harvest International. They are also important in reducing deforestation and promoting sustainable development. Sustainable Harvest International has established programs in Honduras, Panama, Belize, and Nicaragua that work with native farmers to help them resist deforestation, the temptations of deforestation, and achieve economic viability on their own. The Harvest International helps provide communities with long-term assistance and to promote independent development instead of relying on outside aid. This is the inevitable if we don't change. If deforestation continues at its current rate and nothing is done, the world's forests will disappear within 100 years. This is a fact. Without forests, the planet would lose over 2/3 of its biodiversity, which means millions of plants and animals, plant and animal species would go extinct, as many are only found in very select habitats. A reduction in the biodiversity of that magnitude has the potential to completely wipe out all life as we know it. Climate change will pick up exponentially without the trees filtering out the CO2 in the atmosphere. You will see polar ice caps will melt, which will deplete the world's fresh water supply, and as the water drains into the ocean. Waterways will become filthy from erosion and runoff, and climates will change, causing frequent extreme weather events. These are just a few of the many consequences likely to occur if deforestation continues to go unchecked. So there are a few challenges in trying to take care of and fight deforestation and its effect on biodiversity. Most of them are economic related to where they deal with money. So a large amount of the areas where deforestation is most pervasive is areas where property rights are poorly defined, resulting in very inefficient land use. The property rights in these areas are often known as use it or lose it lands, because owning the land and the timber is conditioned on clearing the land. What this does is it motivates people to disregard forest health with the promise of land in return for clearing it and settling it. Another challenge faced is the fact that a lot of these areas are impoverished, where the locals are just barely getting by. When people begin to struggle, they begin to look for the easiest way, and a lot of time this way is burning and cleaning the land to create farmland for quick cash crops and livestock. So without legislation and the enforcement of the legislation, it is pretty much impossible to convince these populations to change their ways. So those are like the biggest challenges that we really face as a world to try and help these areas that are so affected by deforestation. So now I want to look at some of the opposing perspectives. The main opposing perspectives that go against wanting to get rid of deforestation and lessen its impact on biodiversity loss is resource extraction, agriculture, and space for growth. The clearing of forests creates a more usable space for growth. While it isn't the most prevalent cause of deforestation, urban sprawl resulting from the need for more space is the main factor for a few of the deforestation hotspots I mentioned earlier in the presentation. Agriculture is by far the largest contributor to all the factors supporting deforestation. A majority of the areas where deforestation is prevalent are developing countries that require the food and resources from land for growth, while also bringing in more revenue into the area because they're able to do this cheaper and saving money. Mining is the last reason. These tropical areas are often rich with precious metals and stones, which attract investors from all around the world to invest in the land with the intent to clear it and mine it. Advancements in the technology in the field of treating deforestation. Bioacoustic, bioacoustic technology. These devices use solar panels and repurpose cell phones equipped with an extra microphone to record sounds in rainforests. What this does is the sounds that are then transmitted to online storage space in the cloud, and through machine learning, the data is analyzed for acoustic patterns. If illegal activity is detected, such as chainsaws or trucks, partners in the forest are alerted, like local authorities. Another technological advancement helping to fight deforestation is Global Forest Watch. Global Forest Watch is a project overseen by the World Resources Institute, involving over 70 different partners. The goal of this project is to improve the availability and accessibility of global data on forests. By doing so, the hope is that the open source data can be used by people and organizations all over the world for free to help monitor and manage forests, spot and stop illegal logging activities and fires, as well as defending the land and the resources and conducting research. The third big advancement in technology is reforestation drones, which we touched a little bit about in class before the coronavirus. The first drone, at first, when these drones go out, they will map the area for regeneration. Then they will be subsequently fly 2 to 3 meters above the ground, shooting seed pods into the soil. These pods are filled with not only the tree seeds, but all the nutrients required for the tree to start its life. It is even estimated that this method speeds up planting by 10 times and can reduce cost of planting trees by 15%. So it's a win-win. What you can do, or steps that you can take to help. Be an active citizen. Raise the public's awareness to the threats surrounding loss of biodiversity and deforestation. You can also write your local representative explaining these problems and why they should help. Another way what you can do to help is examine consumer products to look for sustainably produced sources. Nonprofit groups such as the Forest Stewardship Council and the Rainforest Alliance certify products they consider sustainable, while the World Wildlife Fund has a palm oil scorecard for consumer brands. And the last thing that you can really do that's super easy is practice sustainable living. Oftentimes it only takes a few small lifestyle changes to make a big difference. And that's my works cited.